Well, with the first pick in the 5th round, the Washington Commanders select Sam Howell out of North Carolina. So he's going to go to back up Carson Wentz, perhaps compete for the starting job there in Landover, Maryland, where they play their home games. And Sam Howell headed to Washington. Brady, your thoughts on this one?
I love this pick for Washington because there's no sure bet that Carson Wentz is going to be the guy. I mean, they bring him in this offseason, and he's basically got a one-year tryout to see what he's capable of. We saw a version of that in Indianapolis, and even though statistically it looked all right, it wasn't good enough for them, so they moved on. Now you bring in a guy in Sam Howell who can sling the football. He's probably the best downfield thrower in this draft class as far as deep ball accuracy. Again, another guy who falls in the category of a much better athlete than people give him credit. I mean, he was literally carrying this team at times, scrambling, running the football, doing all he could because of how bad UNC's defense was and really the lack of weapons out around him. So I'm a big Sam Howell fan. But and I think if he was a few inches taller, you'd probably be viewing him differently. Or if he had come out, a year ago, if that was possible, he probably would have been drafted higher than this because the tape didn't look quite as good. But again, completely different circumstances out around him. So this is a good pick, in my opinion, for Washington, as I think it not only gives them depth at the quarterback spot behind Carson Wentz, but also a little more pressure on Carson Wentz to see if he indeed will end up being the guy. And if not, you got a guy that can kind of sit and watch for a little bit before he's thrust in there to go play, but the talent to actually deliver the football at the NFL level.
Could this, and I know it's early to say this, but we obviously like to project in this business. We like to look ahead. But could this be a situation where we look back, like let's say week 8 next season, we're like, Sam Howell's taking over the starting job for Carson Wentz in Washington?
There's the potential of that. And I think it's, again, because of the situation of how Carson Wentz played at the end of his time in Philly, how things went in Indianapolis, even though, again, you're going to look at the box scores and stats and say, well, you didn't have that bad of a year. But the expectation in Washington is to win. And if Carson Wentz isn't playing at a high enough level, or if there's some locker room issues, I mean, let's be honest about it. There were some players who I think were frustrated with him in Philly, frustrated with him in Indianapolis, and he's now on another team. And that could become a concern, I think, for Washington. And Sam Howell's one of those guys who was beloved within the locker room down in North Carolina. So that's another element to all of this that, we won't know how all that plays out until we get into the season. But yeah, there's definitely the potential chance that if Wentz kind of falls flat or loses that locker room because of poor play and how he's handling adversity, you could see Sam Howell get thrown in there. I'm telling you right now, he's the type of guy that could get a hot hand and end up surprising a lot of people. He's got some of that Baker Mayfield into him. That's more of my comp for him, but I think he's even a better athlete than Baker Mayfield is.
We'll see how that plays out. An interesting situation for Sam Howell heading to our nation's capital to play for the Commanders. For what it's worth, he owns the 2nd highest career passing efficiency, aka passer rating, in ACC history, behind only Trevor Lawrence. We know he went 1st overall last year to the Jaguars. Hopefully it works out for Washington this year. The first pick in the 5th round is Sam Howell going to the Commanders. Brady Quinn breaking down for us here on CBS Sports HQ. Brady, thanks.
But what do you think of Ritter being the number 2 quarterback off the board, and what do you think about him going to Atlanta?
Well, he was my number 2 quarterback, and I think this is a great situation for him, like Brady talked about. You go there behind Marcus Mariota and probably play 5 games, then you take over as a starting quarterback. But you don't have to rush him, and that's the good thing. He can sit and learn. He probably needs to do a little of that. But he's athletic. Much like Mariota, he can move. He's much more athletic than people give him credit for. He ran better than people give him credit for. He was my 2nd quarterback. Great situation for him to be in Atlanta.